So let's get into it, fam. First story up for bat. Let's talk about China. So protests have been continuing to go on. We haven't done a story about this yet, but I've been paying close attention to it. And when it comes to a lot of these situations, it kind of helps to let the situation play out. It's been over almost a month of protest, I think, of hardcore protests going on. And some politicians have been supporting the protest in Hong Kong. So let's take a look at the Twitter. Let's see where the what's the word I'm looking for? Where the feeling of the Congress is at, what they're sensing. Starting off with our favorite, Mr. Adam Schiff. He says the protests in the streets of Hong Kong are defending basic democratic rights. Efforts by authorities to crack down on dissent must be resisted by all freedom-loving people. I stand with the protesters in opposing the extradition law and the violent crackdown. The only problem about that, Adam, is that the extradition law was pulled off the table by the Chinese government in Beijing. They said they're going to suspend the law. And then he also puts all this language in there, the freedom-loving people. That, for me, is code. When you see the neoliberals going, we're fighting for freedom. Yeah, bullshit. You're fighting for nothing but corporate interest. How about your friend Nance? Do you want to read what she says?
It is alarming to watch the Hong Kong police, with support from Beijing, intensify their use of force against the protesters and label them violent criminals.
So, once again, she's kind of stirring up the rhetoric. I would like to say that the protests are two sides. There's the pro-government, pro-police, they say, that are supporting. It's a little bit. It's definitely a generation split here. The protesters themselves that are against the Chinese government in Beijing of sorts, they're younger. There's a lot of young males who don't have a lot of good jobs out there, whatnot. It seems like it's a split in generation. So Nancy Pelosi, once again, with her rhetoric, because I think the Beijing police or the police in Hong Kong, have done a hell of a job compared to some of the police over here in this friggin' country. You want to worry about police force, Nance? There's a lot of stuff going on that you got to fix over here. Hey, here's your girl. Why don't you read your girl? AOC.
Organized civil and massive nonviolent pro-democracy direct actions have been happening in Hong Kong, too. In this instance, to expand civil liberties and demonstrate against an extradition bill. Pay attention. These are hundreds of thousands of people organizing and showing up.
And she's making it sound like it's one side. Can I say this before we get on to the others? Our Congress stinks in foreign policy. They have no clue. I remember watching a clip of Max Blumenthal going through Congress inside the halls, asking people, how do you feel about Venezuela? How do you feel about Venezuela? How do you feel about the sanctions? They all stunk across the board. Even there was a part with AOC where AOC was like running away going, hey, I'll get you an answer and run away. First of all, AOC, you see Max Blumenthal, show a little respect. You give that man the answers he wants. He's been doing some of the greatest journalism down in South and Central America. And that's where the progressives, the true progressives, they looked at people like him, Aaron Matei, who's our boy in Brazil, Glenn Greenwald, Kevin Zeese. These are the people who are actually there. Medea Benjamin. That's the real press. AOC I should see an interview with Max Blumenthal and AOC first. I'm going to read this guy because he represents New York. Chuckles, the Schmuckles, Schumer. Chuckles says, America hears the people of Hong Kong. President Donald Trump, it is unacceptable that you are not standing up to President Xi as he intensifies his crackdown on democratic rights in Hong Kong. The Chinese Communist Party must face consequences. Does that sound like a liberal to you? Does that sound like it
sounds like a liberal to me, but it doesn't sound like a progressive.
Exactly. I think you got to. They've co-opted that word. Here, fam, I'm going to let you lead.
Oh, God.
You love this woman. Elizabeth is putting the war back in Warren, as Johnny Sue would say.
The people of Hong Kong are making clear that they will not tolerate repression, and their movement affirms the power is with the people. They deserve our support and the support of the world.
So far, we're supporting one side. One story.
God.
Here it goes. KK, Kamala, what'd she say?
I stand with the people of Hong Kong and affirm the fundamental right of all people to peacefully protest for their rights. The President of the United States should call for the same.
I'm just wondering, fam, where were all these politicians when the people of Venezuela were in the streets? Were they supporting them? No.
Right.
All they were saying is Maduro this, Maduro that, Maduro bad. I got to read Uncle Joe here and stuff. Is it my time? Is it my time to talk?
Yeah.
Let me tell you something. Obama. My name is Joe Biden. Obama. Joe Biden. I was a friend of Obama.
Shut up and read
Sorry,
the
brave protesters in Hong Kong are demanding the rights and freedoms promised to them. The U.S. should be leading the free world to rally support them and, with one voice, defend our shared democratic ideals and the desire for liberty that beats in every heart. I mean, where does he come up with this shit?
He didn't write that.
Where does he come up with this shit? I can just hear his friggin' voice. And fam, the most disappointing one right here. Go ahead.
The demonstrations in Hong Kong are an inspiration to us all. It is the right of all people to protest for a better future. We stand with these brave protesters and call on the Chinese government to refrain from violence. Okay, he didn't say anything about us getting involved, though.
Dude, but he says he calls on the Chinese government to refrain from violence.
Because that's what we're being told.
He shouldn't be where we're being told.
That's
what we're being told. Why doesn't he just listen to Ron Paul? Because look what Ron Paul says right there. The neocons see Hong Kong as China's soft underbelly. Now, listen, this was very disappointing, and I didn't come on here to trash Bernie Sanders. I love Bernie Sanders, but this is his weakness. It's foreign policy.
It's his advisory.
Well, that's bad.
Is wrong. Yeah.
Tulsi's been off on deployment, so we didn't get a comment from him and stuff like that. But if you just start looking into these things, and I want to just tell our audience out there, I know what Bernie Sanders was saying, but once again, I have a problem with him. If he's going to be the leader of the free world, he's going to be dealing with China, Russia. He has to. I don't like the way he calls Putin an authoritarian and the Chinese government putting them in check. Hey, man, let's check our own government. Once again, the people of Venezuela, nobody stood up again for them, and they took to the streets.
You'd think Putin is an authoritarian, though?
It doesn't make a difference if he is or not. If you're the leader of the free world, you have to deal with him.
Yeah, absolutely. But that doesn't change the fact that the way he's handling his government is very right-wing nationalist.
Okay, but how about the way we're hanging our government over here?
Absolutely. He should call it. He should call it out both.
And remember, in that same speech, he didn't call out Netanyahu. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, he has to call out Netanyahu. And I think BDS and not supporting BDS is a huge weakness that I have a problem with.
But why don't they just play it the Tulsi way? You almost gotta twist Tulsi's arm for her to say that this person is an enemy of sorts. In other words, she's like, listen, all leaders can be considered authoritarian or dictators or adversaries, whatnot. We still have to have a relationship with them. We have to talk to them. By putting a wedge inside before yourself and kind of agreeing with mainstream media. You know what I'm saying? He didn't mention everybody there. He didn't mention the pro-government people, and there's a lot of them. I think there's a video out there that went viral that showed a younger protester and an older protester hugging and crying. Because it's a different type of protest. They're up over here, they're in each other's face. So when you see those pictures, you don't even know if it's pro-government, anti-government, or what's going on if they're both next to each other.
I think the bat, though, this issue is far more complicated than Venezuela. You can't just say, oh, because the neoliberals are supporting it, it means that it's automatically the NGOs. No. You can't just say that.
No. Okay, go ahead.
But I'm definitely suspicious when I see Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Elizabeth Warren, all of these people that have been extremely pro-war, extremely pro-regime change, supporting the only one side of the argument. And I don't put it past us to go and interfere like we've done time and time again. But I still think this issue is a little bit more complex.
You know what? Listen, it is a little bit more complex, but here's the thing. There's got to be an automatic red light. No matter what, whoever's right, which side, which people, we shouldn't be funding or fueling anything in any way, shape whatsoever. Yeah. So it should be an automatic red light if the NED, which is the National Endowment for Democracy, is involved. Now, I'm going to pull up this article right here because this is one of the best articles I've seen. And now let's forget, really quick, I'm so sorry. Do I have the Ron Paul thing? No, I don't. But we put up Ron Paul already, right? And there's a whole thing. You can go on Ron Paul because Ron Paul, once again, I don't understand where a lot of people on the right who are libertarian, who are kind of getting behind this. The libertarians saw this stuff right off the bat. They knew George Soros was involved down in China holdings in back in the days. So they're suspecting that he might be there. But who is behind the Hong Kong protest? We need to look. Mint Press, who Whitney Webb writes for, been doing some great work on the Epstein stuff. The U.S. News website has reported that some groups involved in recent rioting in Hong Kong received significant funding from the National Endowment for Democracy, which is described as the CIA's soft power cutout that was played a critical role to U.S. regime change operations. So any time that you have these groups involved, the National Endowment for Democracy, which is anything but and they fund all these NGOs, you got to immediately put up the red light and say, no, 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 no. We're involved. We have to get out. And you can see here's another one from the MPN News. It says American government's NGOs fuel and fund Hong Kong anti-extradition protest. They already removed the law. They took it back. They suspended the law. They said, hey, we'll suspend the law. And really, to tell you the truth, a lot of people are saying that Beijing had the right to go to Hong Kong and extradite people who were hiding out of Hong Kong that committed crimes back in the mainland. Now, I'm not going to even say that that's the case, whatnot, but that's what they said the law was for, and they suspended it anyways. It's off. You know what I'm saying? So now you got all these NGOs in there fueling money, paying, teaching these kids how to protest the same way they did in Ukraine, the same way they did throughout all South and Central America.
Thousands of people, though? I mean, there's thousands of people.
What it is not, it's not that you get the top ones and you flame something, you light a match. And then they have all these connections. The CIA knows who to go to. They go to the people who are the leaders of these groups, and they co-opt them and they bring them into the light. And it just spreads like wildfire. Because here's the problem now. We're not talking about the serious problems in Hong Kong, which are austerity measures. Remember, it was a British colony for many years, and China's not completely set to take it over for like another 20 years, according to the paperwork, the doctrine, and what's going to happen over. And that's going to be a whole mess down the road when China tries to take complete advantage of it. But there are a lot of people suffering, young people who are suffering in China, in Hong Kong especially, that just needed to be lit. The same way they did in Ukraine, the same way they did in all these countries.
You said it yourself. There are a lot of people suffering in Hong Kong. So it's not that they're not suffering and that they wouldn't be want something different. It is that we are taking advantage of this and we are fueling a little bit of that fire, which I agree with you. Yeah. But I just think that there are definite issues in China regardless of our involvement or not.
So, but the neoliberals are against China, right?
Well, they're against Beijing.
They want China is a threat right now. I mean they have a more of a middle class than we do, and they're communists. So to them they're communists, right? To me they're not really representative of actual communism. But if any sort of success of China would equate to something above capitalism succeeding.
Right, so you have that, but then you also have the fact that there's all these protesters, these young protesters. Yep. So then I don't really see the problem with Bernie saying that, but then because I don't think he knows about the NED,
the NGOs, the
NED. Yeah.
Well, that's that.
I don't think many people know about.
But that's
NED.
the thing. You know who knows about the NED?
Ron Paul.
Who else?
Tulsi.
Thank you. And people will go, why are you supporting Tulsi over Bernie? It's like, listen, I'm ready to get in the streets and march for Bernie Sanders if he's the nominee. I don't want to ever forget that. And I said this before. The wedge between this group here about the people who are supporting Tulsi over Bernie, the reason why they're doing it is foreign policy. The reason why they're doing it is that she understands. She sees this as a red flag. If Tulsi Gabbard comes back and doesn't make the right choice here, I would be very upset. And I'll be the first one to call her out. But like she did in Venezuela, hands off unequivocally, guys. We can't start. And here's the thing, fam. The NED was started, okay, during the Reagan administration. Mm-hmm. And if you remember what was going on, I would always make this joke. I said, at least Ronald Reagan sold weapons illegally to Iran to wage his war in the Contras, and the American taxpayers didn't have to pay for it. But guess what it does? The NED is taking taxpayer dollar, and they're funneling it through all these NGOs, and you and me and everybody out there who pays taxes in America is paying for this.
So it says, although it promotes itself as a non-governmental organization, the NED's website says it receives an annual appropriation from the U.S. Congress through the Department of State to help the U.S. government.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you see what I'm saying?
Founded in 1983, where the spotlight
during Ronald Reagan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Which I think I had an article of that up there, but I might have taken it down, or maybe I didn't put it up there. That was going to explain. It was an article written in 1993 explaining the NED. It was one of the best articles I've ever seen because what they wanted to do is like, okay, we can't use the CIA, so and you're going to see in this George Galloway clip that we got to put up here, it's like the fad, it's the fashion, it's how you sell things to America. Oh, we're spreading democracy, we're doing it this way.
Yeah.
No, we're not. They're our geopolitical adversary, so therefore, the deep state, the CIA and everything, they want havoc going on. So if they can extend any of this stuff going on in Hong Kong, so be it.
I can agree with that, but it is very difficult for someone who's being advised by ill-advised by this guy who I forget his name, who's advising Bernie Sanders. Tulsi Gabbard, you said, used to advise him, and obviously she's running for president, so she can't.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
I think Bernie had better foreign policy prior to his presidential run.
Yeah, and excuse me, guys, for being a little bit superstitious, but when I saw that press release, and we should probably get it up, it was back in the days we started this conversation before we went on. It just felt like to me that the campaign was trying to make a statement. It's like, oh, we're not listening to her ideology anymore. We're going to be calling stuff on ideology. Yeah, that's what I felt. And maybe I'm being a little stupid and superstitious.
Yeah, we're going to have to look back at that press release.
We'll take a look back at it. You know, like you said, it's common sense to say, hey, listen, we're moving on. We're not going to do this over here. We're going to do this over here. But once again, this is the area where I say, when people say, well, why aren't you representing Bernie over Tulsi? This is the reason why. This right here. Now let's listen to a smart man by the name of George Galloway. If it was up to me, I'd say I wouldn't start from here. The Irishman would say, roll the tape.
9 consecutive weeks of protests in Hong Kong, initially sparked by extradition law.
Well, you got till 50 seconds, so. Hold on, ladies and gentlemen. Hold still.
Initiated by mainland China, protests have erupted into violent clashes between demonstrators and police. The chaos even causing flight delays and cancellations on Cathay Pacific, but Beijing saying they're going to, quote, introduce something new to attempt to quell the unrest. This as Hong Kong city leader Carrie Lam defiantly refuses to step down. Joining us to discuss, former UK MP George Galloway. George, always good to see you. We know that initially the people of Hong Kong were outraged over the extradition proposal. That's off the table for now. Why have these folks continued the unrest?
Well, 9 weeks is quite a considerable feat of mobilization, not though as considerable as the 38 weeks of the Yellow Vest mobilization in France. I make the point because there's absolutely no coverage of the Yellow Vests in France, but there is unlimited coverage of the events in Hong Kong, which is related directly to your question. The reason these protests are continuing and continuing to receive such international attention is because they are intended to, and they may well weaken China. And that is an international project of the big powers in the world who want to see China's rise checked and, if possible, reversed. I'm afraid I've hardened my view from the last time we spoke about this. I'm in absolutely no doubt that foreign hands are deeply involved in these protests. The Trojan horses of the so-called NGO movement, which are actually an FGO movement, a foreign government organization movement. I'm absolutely clear that in a spectrum which stretches from the demigod Dalai Lama through the Falun Gong, through the Xinjiang Muslim question, through Tiananmen Square, now to Hong Kong. These are all about dividing and thereby weakening China.
And
there
George,
you go. So you can see what George Galloway says. It's like the new fad now. The NGOs. It's like the American government and the intelligence agencies just package this thing up to make it sound like, oh, we're helping people strive for democracy in areas where they're suppressed, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to take your money. We're going to put it to work. No, they're fueling these things.
And let it be clear that these areas some people in these areas are definitely repressed and definitely have issues. But it is like taking advantage of that, of someone that's vulnerable, and then, using it and manipulating it for your own accord, which is what we do and what we have been doing time and time again.
Yeah. So. I was wondering, does China have Medicare over there? Do they have Medicare for all in China?
I'm not positive.
I'm pretty sure they do.
Sure
they got socialized medicine.
I'm pretty sure they do. I think the Philippines and us are the only people that don't have.
Pretty much, and I believe we say this all the time. In 3 years, in 2022, 76% of Chinese urban population will be middle class. In those 3 years, 45% of Americans will be middle class. Mm-hmm. We're going the opposite way. Like I said, this whole kind of mentality, and even the Democrats are doing this, and that's why Tulsi's so important to be on that stage, because she's that anti-imperialistic voice. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Even the Democrats are there. So, by the way, too, fam, just to show you another little thing, with the NGOs, usually when the NGOs, it takes a little time to come out which NGOs are doing what, and eventually we'll find the funding. We haven't found George Soros directly linked to an NGO, but he's had a lot of business and a lot of times in China in the past. And I think I even put in there real quick that he put up, maybe I put up there, that he put up that George Soros was involved. But yesterday, fam, Google, YouTube decided to suppress over 200 videos about Hong Kong. And look at the way they label this stuff. This is the disgusting part that just drives me crazy. Hong Kong protests, YouTube takes down 200 channels spreading disinformation. Oh, you mean we're not spreading your information? We're not spreading your narrative. And it's kind of funny that we did a show yesterday with Michael Treasure Santucci talking about the Fair Use Act, talking about freedom of speech. I'm sorry. I want some type of legislation to check these companies. They cannot run around unchecked anymore. I'm done with them. 200 channels, fam, they took down because it didn't spread their narrative.
And yeah, I mean, we might be taken down for this.
I don't care.
Just for having this conversation.
Let them take us down.
Which is ridiculous. I mean, that's fascism. The left likes to promote fascism in a different way than the right. The left likes to censor and spy on people through their control so everybody can live in a happy little bubble, while the right just does it in a completely different way, but they still do it.
Can you read this one sentence here? Because I just want you to show the language right here. The one sentence. So YouTube
has disabled 20 channels.
210.
210 channels that appeared to be part of the coordinated influence campaign against pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong.
Against pro-democracy. They're against pro-democracy.
Yeah, none of these channels, I mean, we're not against democracy, but we're just pointing out that this could possibly, there's obvious evidence that we have influenced and ignited part of this, just like we do all the time. And the most valid predictor of the future is the past. So again, we've done this time and time again. And I think there are issues in China. I don't for any second want to go live in China. I don't for any second, envy their form of nationalist authoritarian government. I don't.
No, I don't. I envy the fact that they haven't gone to war in 3 decades.
Okay,
that's what I envy.
Okay, but
so if you're pro-nationalistic in a way, you're pulling back and you're not interfering with anybody's business.
But aside from that, there are better ways to do that than to become a state where you have no say in a lot of things.
I agree, but we're not the country to tell them that because we have our own goddamn problems.
Absolutely, we are.
We have our own forms of
absolutely
control.
We are.
And the Epstein case is showing. And George Galloway is actually connected to the Epstein case, fam. He was the one. We found this out yesterday. I didn't know this. I knew that it was the Labour Party within British Parliament to take him down. This is Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father. But it was Seymour Hersh who came over and gave information to George Galloway, and then he took it and just exposed this man for what he was. If we had you being exposed, we could hit it up. But that was it for that, fam. I think people have to make their own decision and see what's going on. And really, I still think we should make a change. If it's not Tulsi, it doesn't have to be Tulsi who's advising him because obviously she's running her own campaign. But I think Bernie Sanders, hands down, needs to get away from this guy. I forgot his name. I got to look it up and get a new foreign policy advisor. This guy, fam, I'm sorry for cursing, is poo-poo kachoo.
I can agree with that. Are we moving on to me right now?
Let's move on.
Wait, I also want to mention that while these Hong Kong protests are going on, there's also protests going on in France with the Yellow Vest movement. And,
no coverage there.
And no coverage.
No coverage there from the mainstream media, right, Johnny?
No coverage at all.
There's been very little coverage of other protests and of other issues happening as well.
The pro-Maduro, they're not out there following the pro-Maduro.
Oh, yeah, no.
The anti-Maduro, they'll show you in a heartbeat.
You have to look at all of those things.
And this was today, and, the G7 summit is happening there.
Yep.
So we're going to be looking at that. Right now it's nighttime in France, so.
Okay. Pasta, you said you had it.
You're on right here. This is it right here. China. First one right there, girl.
Awesome. So